Welcome back to You're All Doomed, where we're aimlessly wandering around Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, 13 minutes at a time. I'm psychic juggernaut Greg.
And I'm Brian.
And this segment begins with a concerned-looking Tina sitting in front of a staircase and ends with Tina and Nick peering over the ruined chasm of the same staircase. Nick, who is now packing heat, runs next door to the party house, only to find it empty, so he starts calling people's names and looking around. Meanwhile, Jason is back to tromping through the woods. At the same time, Mrs. Shepherd is running around the woods yelling Tina's name, looking for Tina after the supposed car crash. Dr. Cruz is trying to get Mrs. Shepherd to quit it for some reason when they hear a twig snap. Dr. Cruz is spooked by this and says that Mrs. Shepherd can find her own way back, but she cleverly grabs his Volvo key. Cruz sees Jason creeping up behind Mrs. Shepherd. She turns around just in time, and both Cruz and Mrs. Shepherd take off in a blind panic. Jason pursues, armed with a fucking sling blade. They both stumble on a branch, and Cruz cowardly uses Mrs. Shepherd as a human shield. He is sprayed with blood when she is skewered by Jason.
Yeah, Dr. Cruz is showing his true colors here using Mrs. Shepherd as the shield. It's a real dick move.
Yeah, he's quite possibly the most loathsome person in the whole series to this point. He's such a jackass. Amanda Shepherd was played by none other than Susan Blue.
Never heard of her.
She's done a ton of voiceover work, including both versions of the Ghostbusters cartoon, the original Ghostbusters, and the real Ghostbusters. She was also a character on 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, which was the lamest incarnation of the Scooby-Doo franchise, where this little yellow pajama-clad tyke was running around with Scooby and Shaggy, and I believe they were fighting against Vincent Price, who was commanding all these ghosts to fight against.
But there's only one credit of hers that matters.
Gem and the Holograms?
No. And that is the voice of RC in 1986's Transformers, the movie.
The only female Transformer, in fact.
This is true.
She did have a few on-screen appearances on Three's Company, Newhart, and Knight Rider. She seems to enjoy that she was involved in Friday the 13th and talks fondly about it on interviews that I've seen. She's also openly lesbian and was married to her first wife all the way back dating to 1992 until that woman's death in 2010. This is way before it was mainstream at all, and pretty brave, and that's great. She has been married to her current wife since 2013. Again, before it was anywhere near as common as it should be.
Nick, armed with Tina's dad's gun, walks into the party house and all the lights are off and nobody is around. He calls for David and Eddie and Maddie and Melissa, but of course he's not getting any answer. So Nick looks under one of the tables and sees Eddie's dead body, and he freaks out and leaves the party house and heads to Tina's house.
But she's not sitting by the staircase where he left her. Instead, he gets jump scared by Melissa.
What? What is she doing there?
What is she doing there?
Is she taking a dump? Like, we saw her leave the party house right before Eddie got killed, but there is absolutely no reason for her to go over to Tina's house, and certainly not to just let herself into Tina's house. But yeah, there she is, just wandering around by herself.
Yeah. And, I mean, he very nearly blows her away with the gun, which frankly would have been kind of awesome. He tells her that everyone else is dead, even though he doesn't know that for sure, and she only sort of believes him.
Only minutes earlier, Tina was pleading with Nick to let her stay at the house in case her mother comes back, but now she's walking through the woods again. She eventually comes across Dr. Cruz, who...
She walks right past him, but doesn't even notice until he stage whispers to her.
Yeah, he's like hiding behind the thinnest set of like shrubbery you can imagine. He's like, psst.
I laughed out loud. How preposterous.
Tina, I'm over here. But he's completely visible, not hidden in any way whatsoever. But somehow he got away from Jason, and yeah, he tells Tina to come back to the house with him. So Tina wonders where her mother is, and he says she's back at the house, and Tina doesn't believe him.
Of course, she knows this is bullshit because she just came from the house.
Right. Tina gets closer and sees that Dr. Cruz's sweater is actually covered in blood. And Dr. Cruz tells Tina that her mother is dead and pleads for Tina's help to get him out of there. So he's just such a pussy, and he's just cowering for any kind of, protection here.
She runs deeper into the woods, and he takes the opportunity to book it in the other direction. He leans against a tree to catch his breath, only to hear off camera the ripcord of a motor being pulled, which is fucking awesome.
Yeah, it is really nice.
He turns in horror to see Jason marching forward with a kick-ass buzzsaw brush cutter. And Kane Hodder does some really great pissed off Jason acting here. Like, even, it's as though Jason can even tell what a loathsome scum Dr. Cruz is, and he's really going to relish killing this guy.
Where's Jason getting this variety of weapons? We see him going back and forth between the house and the woods, but I mean, where did he pick up this thing? Because this brush cutter is monstrous. It's not like he just had it in his utility belt. He had to have gotten it somewhere. I don't know.
He got it from the shed that Maddie was hiding in, that had all the gardening implements.
So he just keeps going back there and grabbing a new tool.
That's why he's back and forth so much too, because he's got to go restock his items. We have a couple of shots of Jason marching forward with this buzzsaw in the camera that would have been fantastic in 3D. I wish they'd had this scene in part 3.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of revving of the buzzsaw right up against the screen, and
Cruz scrambles away, probably with shit-filled pants. He reaches a small clearing and pauses and doesn't hear the motor anymore. But Jason comes up from behind him and then punch shoves him to the ground. So while Cruz is lying there stunned, Jason fires up the motor and brings the blade down on Cruz, who Cruz sees it coming and knows this is it for him. It's set up to be one of the greatest kills in the series, but it's kind of sad. All we get is the very briefest touch, and I'm not even sure whether it was in Cruz's gut or on his chest. It's in a tight close-up, so you can't tell exactly where he gets hit. And then we have a really kind of comical shot of Cruz crossing his eyes in sort of a goofy death scene. It was very disappointing for such a great build-up.
Yeah, especially for a character like Dr. Cruz, which I think is one of the most despicable, if not the most despicable character we've seen in this series yet, and just someone that I really felt like deserved a much more brutal kill, and I was actually looking forward to Jason catching up to him and getting him. But yeah, the kill ended up being cut for ratings purposes, but yeah, what we're left with is really just kind of lame. I mean, the buzzsaw, basically what we see is it just kind of looks like it just cuts through the wool of his sweater, and then there's a little bit of blood, and so it's almost like he just kind of nicks him and leaves it at that. But I think the original kill had a lot more guts spilling out and a little bit more impact with the buzzsaw, but what we're given is kind of disappointing.
It had so much potential. Dr. Cruz was famously, of course, played by Terry Kaiser, who was on a ton of TV in the early 80s. I actually knew him first as a sleazy reporter from a couple episodes of Night Court, so I've always had kind of an instinctive distrust of characters that Terry Kaiser plays. Of course, everyone knows him best as the corpse in Weekend at Bernie's and Weekend at Bernie's 2, in which he starred alongside Catherine Mary Stewart, who we, for some reason, mention on this podcast almost every season. He also had a part in Mannequin 2 on the Move, and Tammy and the T-Rex, which Brian and I will be watching later this weekend, coincidentally enough.
He was also in an episode of Manimal starring Jaws 3's Simon McCorkindale.
Yeah.
And he was in a made-for-TV movie called Starflight, The Plane That Couldn't Land, which I am going to look to see if we can rent.
He has done some fan conventions. It seems like it's a little bit split between Weekend at Bernie's fans and Friday the 13th fans. And he seems like a really personable dude. I watched one interview with him, and he seems like a really nice guy and very enthusiastic to meet people. Amusingly enough, as of 2015, he had never actually seen this movie, even though he was in it. He does speak fondly about the experience, but it sounds like it was a really tough shoot involving a lot of nights, and he didn't get as much of a chance to hang out with people as he would have liked. But he has nothing other than kind things to say about John Carl Buechler and Kane Hodder specifically. He seems to have enjoyed really working with Kane.
Tina continues her search through the most well-lit forest I've ever seen, and she eventually finds her mother's body. So I guess this means Tina will stop running through the woods now. Just kidding.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just
Right.
kidding. So she continues to run through the woods, and she sees Jason stroll right by, which is kind of cool because he's oblivious to what's going on around him.
Yeah, I
but
like
Tina
that.
sees him. We don't really get to see Jason in vulnerable positions very often, but it was kind of cool just seeing him kind of wandering, doing whatever he's doing, probably going back to the shed to get another tool. But from about 50 feet away, she sees someone wedged into a tree, and Tina thinks it's Kate. Tina has spent maybe 10 minutes with these people, and not only does she remember everyone's name, but she can recognize them at night in the woods from 50 feet away.
I mean, not to mention the fact that Kate now has a party horn sticking out of her eye. We get to see it much better this time, and it is kind of a cool effect. This causes Tina to back up 2 steps and bonk into Sandra's body, which, of course, Tina should have seen laying on the ground because it was mere feet away from where she's standing. Looking up, she sees Maddie with her throat slit and pinned to a tree with nails through her wrists.
I know we pick on Jason's body hiding tactics a lot, but the more he does it in this movie, the more it actually makes sense, at least from this particular movie standpoint, because if he was trying to get to every person in the house, he would want them to stay at the house as long as possible. And if they see a body in the house, then they're going to run. And it's going to make it harder for him to capture him. Now, he still does plant some bodies in the house. We see David's head on the bench, but the idea of like taking Kate's body and taking Ben's body and Russell's body and away from the house and hiding him into the woods, he potentially wasn't expecting all these kids to go running into the woods as often as they were. So they wouldn't necessarily have reason to believe that there was something going on at the house because there's no evidence that something is going on.
Right.
So I kind of like the approach, but it does kind of fall apart with him leaving David's head there. But it's the first time where I've really felt like he might actually be onto something here.
That's an interesting thought because I hadn't considered that, but it does make a lot of sense. I actually almost wondered if these were more psychic visions and that she was actually kind of seeing things that had happened in various locations, but she was mentally consolidating them into hallucinations where she was standing. It's hard to say because Jason does, in fact, have a history of setting up these little displays. So you could very well be right that it's a strategic tactic on his point. In any case, the next thing we know, Tina's back on the road running to go get her car that she crashed earlier. Unfortunately for her, Jason is standing immediately in her path. This sets us up for a psychic showdown, which gets pretty awesome.
Yeah, Tina uses her Tina powers to pull up the roots of some nearby trees, and the roots wrap around Jason, trapping him in some like Evil Dead type, scenario. And I like Jason because he's got this like, what the fuck look on his face as he sees all these like roots kind of like starting to wrap around him. And he falls face first into a puddle. And as he's struggling to get up, Tina notices a power line overhead. So she once again uses her Tina powers to not only cut the electrical cables, but also guide them down the road, kind of like a snake, until they're touching the puddle that Jason is still standing in. This is where it's starting to get a little ridiculous. I mean, I realize she's been throwing TV, sets across the room and things like that, but has full control over these powers now, whereas before it kind of seemed like this reactionary thing that she didn't really have a lot of control over. It was just kind of the direct result of an emotion, but now she's like guiding things down roads into specific areas.
Yeah, she's got some fine motor control that she has not displayed. Although I suppose it could be said that her emotions are now so heightened, having found her dead mother and being scared and possibly exhausted from running through the woods so much, that almost like a desperation reflex has kicked in, and she's not even conscious that she's in such control of her powers. It's freed of any conscious thought. She's now doing what her mind has been able to do all along. It's just been restricted by her conscious thoughts. I liked the effect of the power line slithering along the ground. That was neat. But yeah, it is getting a little bit silly. So Jason is electrocuted and goes face first again into this puddle. She approaches him to confirm that the battle is over, but she's wrong. Jason stands up and she runs away with him plodding after her. And his pants look really, really saggy here. She runs all the way back to the party house, even though it had to be more than 5 miles away, because she was almost back to her crashed car, which was further away from the house
than Michael's car.
Yeah. So she's hauling ass. She takes a moment to rest in the kitchen and collect herself when Jason leaps through the window like fucking Black Panther. He gets back to his feet, and there's a really great shot of him standing amongst all the birthday party balloons. There's a moment that I've complained about before. We get a close-up of Jason glaring at Tina, and we can see his right eye through the hole of the hockey mask. It's clearly intentional. It's a conscious choice on the part of the director and cinematographer here, but I still hate it. It's too much humanity for Jason Voorhees.
Jason is now realizing that he's dealing with no ordinary person and begins his showdown with Tina. She backs up into the next room and uses her Tina powers to close the door, which isn't all that impressive. But then she uses her Tina powers to move the kitchen table in front of the door, which takes Jason all of half a second to move the table out of the way and just open the door.
Yeah, this makes absolutely no sense to me. It's a pocket door that it's 2 pocket doors that she slams closed and then blocks them with a table, which won't keep him from opening the doors because it's not impeding their progress back into the wall. And the table is on Jason's side of the door. So he can easily move it aside anyway. At first I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Yeah, it would make more sense if she was doing all this to slow him down so she could go run away, but she's not. She's just standing on the other side of the door waiting to see what happens, and it delays him for 2 or 3 seconds tops.
Yeah. Now he's in the living room with her, and so she psychically hurls the sofa at him, which knocks him down. She falls backward onto a potted plant that humorously contains David's fake decapitated head,
which has made his way downstairs.
Right. I do like, I had to still pause it because I do like that one of her fingers accidentally goes into the decapitated head's mouth. But Jason tosses the sofa aside and stands back up. This gives Tina a chance to hurl the potted plant, head and all, and bonk Jason in the face. Unintentionally hilarious.
Fortunately, this gives Tina enough time to do what she loves to do, which is to run outside. She doesn't get very far before Jason is standing on the front porch of the house, and Tina uses her Tina powers to crumble the patio onto Jason, just like she crumbled the dock onto her father.
There's some great shots of Jason kind of going, oh, shit, as this covered porch rains down on his head. It's a fantastic stunt. Kane Hodder actually admits that it hit him with much greater force than he was expecting and really caused him to go to the ground pretty hard. Fortunately, he's a trained stuntman and was also the coordinator for this movie, so he has no one to blame but himself. But damn, it looked like it hurt.
Now that Jason is buried in a pile of wood, Tina runs next door to her house where she's greeted by Melissa and Nick, and Tina tells Nick that her mom is dead. She also seems pretty certain that she's killed Jason. Melissa, meanwhile, doesn't believe Tina and opts to go back to the party house to go to bed. And then Nick begs her not to leave, but she doesn't listen. And she opens the door and goes, "Fuck you. Fuck you both." And waiting on the front stoop is Jason, wielding an axe, which he quickly deposits into Melissa's skull.
Yeah, it's great. He buries it in her face and then heaves her lifeless body against the wall and behind the TV. It's some great stunt work here, especially because you can still see the axe handle stuck in the stunt woman's face. Melissa was played by Susan Jennifer Sullivan, who was apparently rather sweet and kind on set in direct contrast to her character. She also appeared on an episode of Charles in Charge. There's a lot of discrepancy online as to whether or not she died in 2009 or is actually still alive. When the people were making the Crystal Lake Memories documentary, they found an obituary for a woman with that name who died out on the East Coast and seemed to be of the right age, but then received later some information that that was a different woman with the same name. So Susan Jennifer Sullivan may in fact be a woman named Grace Sullivan, who was married to the director of Gattaca, Andrew Niccol, from 1991 to 2002. I think in either case, there's strong evidence that she suffered a bout of cancer for several years in the early 2000s, but again, it's hard to pin down whether or not she managed to beat that or whether she succumbed to it. Having thrown Melissa's body aside, Jason has now whittled down everyone to his last two victims and stands hulking in the doorway of the Shepherd home. Nick, in direct contrast to Dr. Cruz earlier, heroically shields Tina's body behind him. It's a nice little touch considering we saw Dr. Cruz using Tina's mom as a human shield earlier.
And because Nick and Tina are unable to escape via the front door, they decide to head upstairs, and Jason is following close behind. As Jason is standing at the top of the stairs, Tina uses her Tina powers to swing a chandelier into Jason's face. And this stuns him enough that knocks him backwards, and just the sheer hulk of his body causes him to fall through the stairs into the basement. And we end this episode with Tina and Nick standing at the top of the stairs, staring down into the hole.
We've had 3 deaths this time. Amanda Shepherd, Tina's mother, Dr. Cruz, Tina's therapist, and Melissa, who is Tina's arch nemesis. We'll see if Tina and her friend Nick are able to escape the second floor of her own home, but you'll have to come back and join us next time to find out.
On the next episode of You're All Doomed.